We underappreciate the power of belonging. So when we think about information systems, the first mistake we make is to think it's all technology. Information systems are half tech and half human. IT systems are all tech, but information systems are half human. And we leave the humans out and forget that.
Welcome to the Distributed Truth Podcast. Today's B2B SaaS teams all share one thing in common: fragmented customer data. Marketing, sales, customer success, finance, and product teams need better approaches to unified customer data. What does it look like to be data-driven rather than data-inhibited? What is the link between investing in unified customer data and revenue growth? How can we create consistent customer experiences through unified customer data? Join us here at the Distributed Truth Podcast as we interview a wide array of go-to-market, revenue operations, technology, and data leaders, all dedicated to solving the problem of fragmented customer data. Hello and welcome to the Distributed Truth Podcast from Syncari. I'm one of your hosts, Evan Dunn, Growth Marketing, and I'm here with Tim Lockie today, founder and CEO of The Human Stack. I think Tim has a lot of interesting things to say. He's been around a lot of places, big organizations, small organizations. And he cares most about the relationship between systems and their failures and people and their struggles. And hence the name Human Stack. He's got a podcast of his own. I'll let him introduce a bit more here, though. Tim, what has been driving you and the naming conventions you've chosen around your brands?
Yeah, what drives me is a passion to see people less harmed by the process of using technology in the workplace. That really is what drives the heartbeat of my work. This is especially true in the impact economy for nonprofits and social impact organizations. But I think that there's a wide conversation around how that plays out, what that does. And the global conversations around data right now are really interesting. And what we decide, right, on data now is going to have huge implications for the road forward. So I think these are fun conversations.
Yeah, before we jumped into this recording, we were riffing a bit on that global conversations around data and the intersection with AI. And before we dive too much into AI, can you give us your view on, you talk about people being harmed by systems over the last decade or so, let's say, the explosion of SaaS technology, marketing technology. How do people get harmed by systems? Can you elaborate on that a little bit for us?
Yeah. What I love about the work that I do now, because I started as just a Salesforce consultant helping nonprofits get into Salesforce. And I did that for a decade, and we were good at it. I became a Salesforce MVP, traveled the world talking about Salesforce. And I liked it, and I still like Salesforce. I think it's a fine platform or whatever. But in 2019, I went to a conference, and somebody put a slide up that said 90% of organizations collect data, but only 5% use that data to make decisions. And it ruined my business. I don't know what it brainwormed in. And by the next month, I'd cleared my calendar. I said, we're doing this wrong. I noticed that all of my contracts, I would get paid even if we created systems that clients stopped using 2 months after we were gone. Collected that data, never converted it to decisions, and I think that would be one thing if it were just like the cold, hard space of the for-profit industry. But these were organizations that are out there on the front lines, feeding kids globally, doing medical aid, relief work. And I just thought, we cannot do this. We have to figure out a better way to create that. And when I started to dig in, what I found is that in these organizations, the people that are running these systems have a really hard time. And they're very isolated. People don't understand the work that they're doing. It's all non-promotable work. These are people for whom their bosses don't understand the connections between the value of what they're doing in collecting this data and the value that could be produced by that data. And instead it goes into fundraising campaigns, not even well. It's not being tracked against, how do we reduce harm or identify students in schools that are reaching boiling points to create harm for other students? All of this data could be used in a different way. And instead, big data companies are using it to identify how to addict kids to Facebook instead of how to reduce harm to humans. And I think all of that just kind of boiled up inside. And I said, I'm not participating in that anymore. So I rethought the methodology, looked at what we were doing, and then realized nobody really cared about it, which was kind of a problem. So I spent 2 years figuring out how to talk about it. And when I got it to pass the mom test, and my mom could understand it, I was like, okay, I've got something. And that was about a year and a half ago. And since then, I've just been doing more and more around what does it look like to do this work. I can tell you what, if you're interested, I can tell you what I said that finally caught her attention. But
oh, absolutely. The mom test is, it's a challenge for every marketer and seller.
Exactly.
The Thanksgiving question.
I know, right? Exactly. Especially, so my siblings run restaurants and photography businesses, very tangible things, right? And so, not that it's a competition, but it always is anyway. So what I said is, Mom, imagine that Salesforce is like a car manufacturer, and my old consulting firm was like a car dealership. Nonprofits would come and order a CRM, and we'd put the donor advised lighting on it and the soft credit tow package, whatever, right? And then we'd give them a key, or we'd deliver it to their parking lot, and it would sit there, or they would wreck it driving off the lot, because what they needed was driver's ed, and they don't sell driver's ed at the dealership, right? In fact, they don't sell driver's ed at all. That would be called digital transformation. And it's the emperor's new clothes of the professional services world. And so that's the problem. We need to start teaching people how to drive technology, not just acquire technology. And it's funny how this works, but how many car commercials have you seen in your lifetime versus how many driver's ed commercials have you seen in your lifetime? And I think that is just what's in the market. There's so much SaaS marketing, as you were identifying, around acquisition, and it's just a playbook, acquire the next customer. And that's just the only move. There isn't even adequate support or success for those customers later on. It's like they don't even care about attrition at some point. So I found that really interesting, and that was that's what I took on. And my mom finally could understand it a little bit, and so that's what I do now.
That's a great analogy. CRM is a car dealership. I think any tech audience listening. First, I want to contextualize something. Even if you're talking about nonprofits, right? I think it's important for-profit companies to understand that just means a low budget version of whatever they're dealing with, right? Is that resonate with your experience switching between the two realms?
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of. Here's the one thing I'll say on it. It's not just a different industry that's downscaled. It's a different economy. So I'm an economist by trade. And what I found was that in the for-profit economy, what you do is as little as you can for as much as possible. I'm saying it crudely, but that's how you get profit, which is leftovers, right? You do as little as you can for as much as you can charge. In the nonprofit space is very different. You do as much as you can for as little as possible. And the fundamental dynamics of that create two separate economies, and all that means at the data level is, yes, it's a stripped down budget, but it's not just a stripped down budget. You have other tools that are invisible to people that aren't used to working in that space, like volunteers. Free labor does not exist in other organizations, so that's one. So there's a lot of quirks in the market, but functionally at a data level, yeah.
It also means that, volunteers is a good thing to bring up, right? You better have some really good permissions, restrictions, processes, guidance, documentation, right? Because they also are less beholden to the outcomes, and for better and for worse, right? But Tim, I think you said a lot of things that sparked a lot of thoughts. That analogy, though, right? Makes me think what you're talking about is sort of an adoption-centric approach to systems and data, right? Like utility first, adoption first, everything else last. Which I think a lot of people talk that game, right? But whether they can actually play it is the question the entire B2B SaaS industry is wrestling with now in the era of NDR and NRR, right?
Yeah, and I did not mean to solve that problem, but I did.
How so?
Well, it was a combination of the right things at the right time. So I didn't solve it through the lens of how do I keep my existing business. I solved it through what's the real issue here. And I adopted something that all of us consultants don't want to adopt, but I didn't see another way to do it, which is we need to start contracting on outcomes of the behavior of others, so that what we're contracting in is we will create a different way of behaving in you in X amount of time. All of the technology contracts that are written are around deliverables that shield contractors from that, right? Consultants from that. And I looked around and I was like, where's an industry that does this? And I found personal trainers, right? Which is the most metric driven relationship. I could use a personal trainer, quite honestly, but I've never had one. But I imagine it, and the way I imagine it is like, this is a person that meets you there. And because it's a person, you go, right? Otherwise you don't go to the gym. So you go there and then they say, pick up this thing that weighs this much, this many times for this many reps, for this many days, for this number of days per week, for this many months, and you'll have this number of an outcome. Like, it is a very, very metric driven. Here, you do this and you get this outcome. It doesn't matter if they do it for you, like, it doesn't help you. And I think that was the aha moment I had when it comes to consulting around adoption and around changing behavior. We're missing a methodology like Agile or Waterfall. We're missing a methodology for that on the human stack. And secondly, we have to create the change in someone else. It can't just be us. We have to find a way to create that change in someone else. It has to be predictable. It has to, be scalable, and it has to be profitable. And because I was looking at it through that lens, I think I uncovered it in a different way. And so, yeah, I've been working on that. The way that intersects with data, if you don't mind if I jump to this, is that when I started looking at the reason that people collect data and then don't make decisions with it is because they're smart enough not to. They know how bad that data is. They've seen how it's collected. They know that they're not putting the right fields in there, and they're filling it with garbage stuff just to get the required fields to accept the data. And so they shouldn't be making decisions with that data. So the very first play has to be, you have to get data that you trust, and you have to convert that to information that's meaningful to you. And then the last step is to convert that information to insight. And staff do the data work, directors do the import or the information work, and executives do that insight work. And executives a long time ago just started using instinct instead of data. And now they don't even expect it from the system. All they want from the system is for people to quit complaining that it doesn't work.
You brought up, that resonates a ton. I think that data highway you just painted the picture for, we talk about that a lot in terms of like BI stacks and how problematic it is.
Right.
That you have these source systems, they're called, even though they're the end use systems for internal teams, they really are like where the data matters the most, like your Zendesk, Salesforce, HubSpot, Marketo, right? They've got data coming in. Someone pulls it out with an ETL tool, shoves it in a warehouse, then shows it in a dashboard. I mean, that is so many steps. Oh, don't forget the DBT, transformations on the warehouse, and don't forget the observability on the pipelines, and that's so many levels of abstraction. But I like how you painted there's the systems pathway, the highway, and parallel there's a human highway.
Yep.
And yeah, executives are savvy enough. I think that's a point people miss. people are not using your dashboards because they're smart.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
they figured out, like, wait a second,
right.
that doesn't add up.
Yep.
You know,
and they know
so
it in a
yeah,
second.
they're doing instinct. They're doing their own calcs. Yeah. But you brought up too, operations folks in revenue, GTM teams, and sales ops, CRM admins, right? They often deal with whether to restrict. They think about the behavioral mechanisms that you're talking about, right, all the time. Should I restrict this field or open text or drop down? Like, what's the best? That's some really sticky behavioral science questions. And then the sales leaders come along and say, require it, right? Like, I want MedPick times 20, more data better. But what that does is create the inverse effect where people are actually fudging data to work with the system they hate. Talk a little bit more about that. Did I miss anything in that story? How do you navigate? That's a murky spider web.
Yeah. Wow. Nobody ever gets that. I'm just so happy to finally talk about this because it's just a layer that I rarely get to think or talk at. And what I want to start with is to say we underappreciate the power of belonging. So when we think about information systems, the first mistake we make is to think it's all technology. Information systems are half tech and half human. IT systems are all tech, but information systems are half human. And we leave the humans out and forget that. And if you look at the base code of technology, it's zeros and ones, right? It's all in or out. It's all true or false. So it's these just massive nested if statements that you make. And we take that way of thinking about technology and we convert it to humans. Humans are not true false. We don't care about true false. What we care about is in out. Are we in the group or not in the group? Like, that's our fundamental base code all the time. And when it comes to employment, we're like, are we in and getting paid or not? Right? Like that. And are we in and getting paid more? And that's the way that we know we're more in. And so we've left out this whole element of belonging. And because we don't view data and behavior as a source of belonging, we keep getting the wrong signals, which is why someone's saying, we got to have this kind of data, so we got to require it. Nobody stopped to ask, like, okay, how much more belonging does this person get by filling that in? And if you start asking the questions that way, what you immediately start linking to is that when you connect attention and power together, that's accountability. And when you focus accountability on the right kind of behavior, you see behavior change very, very quickly. So instead of going at it through a CRM forcing you to make decisions you don't really want to make, instead, what needs to happen is that you have to start connecting that to someone that is looking at your performance in data and noticing when you do the right thing, right? Which is the most powerful form of accountability. And when you start creating decisions around that, that's part of what drives behavior. The other driver of behavior, and I studied under BJ Fogg from the Stanford Behavior Lab. It was really interesting to just see how important motivation and easiness are in people's, in the spectrum of people's behavior. So if someone's not motivated to do something, you have to make it really, really easy or they won't do it. If they're really motivated to do something, then it can be more challenging and they will do it. So what organizations need to do with data is they need to start looking at how do you increase motivation and increase the easiness of getting there, which sounds like it's UX, but I feel like it's a different layer and level than UX. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Can you give us an example or a story or just, even a field like, like let's take user personas in a CRM, right? Like on an account. This person is an influencer. This person's a champion, right? Like, talk to me about that attention and power dynamic, and about how, like, why a representative might be incentivized by that concept of belonging to do A or B with that type of field.
Yeah. So that's a great one. I've been thinking a lot about personas in my own CRM. So this feels kind of personal on that front. The place I would start on that is oftentimes the person entering the data is not the person that needs the data downstream. And in fact, if the person entering the data is going to use the data, they're usually pretty good about it, right? So we are already in the zone where people are entering, the problem areas are all where you're entering data that someone else is going to use, right? If you don't know who that other person is, you have no relationship with them, you don't care about them at all, and it's on a different team on an offshore account, and it's just somebody you never interact with, you have a different approach. You have different mechanisms that you're going to use to incentivize someone to enter that data. So if it's a persona, that's probably someone on the sales team that might be 2 desks over from you. And you might be more aware of how that helps that person do their job. And so it's small micro decisions or incentives that exist within us that you don't map out in a data map, right? You don't ever think about that, but it is actually the way that people behave. So that's why things like digital culture being housed in digital tools is suddenly an important factor, because you create more belonging. And to just drive that home, the way that you may know someone overseas is because of the cat photo they put on Slack, right? That's enough to actually create that kind of connection where you're going to do that. Now, I recognize that these are limits of larger organizations, but it's just a question of degrees. And if that's the goal, and if leaders start seeing that as important, if they started to see that the tighter we drive connection and we can tie outcomes to the way that we're entering data, the more aligned we can be and the higher data quality we can start collecting. I think very few leaders are able to understand the connection between, culture, digital maturity, and incentivizing data quality.
I think there's some, I totally agree. I think there's really interesting parallels with the whole return to office conversation, actually, because ultimately we're talking about how a person feels belonging via productivity and contribution, right? And my biggest issue with the premise of the RTO argument from most folks is, I'm nervous you're not being productive. Immediately, anyone below C-suite feels untrusted.
Yep.
Right? Like they don't belong. They're just a cog in a machine, and no one wants to be a cog in a machine. That's what AI is for, after all.
That's perfectly said. I've not heard that, but I love it. That's like, sorry to throw you off your track, but I just love that idea. Anyway, keep going. Yep.
No, you're good. I think what's interesting thinking about the flow of data when it comes from a manual input or an automated input is then it's got to be revisited very tactically. And this is what I see a lot of revenue operations experts. We work with a lot of consultants, right? They are so mindful of this, just like yourself, right? This person is going to see, we've got cleaning room reports. We've got that this person is going to hand this off to this person, right? So that user field, persona field becomes used by their friend, to your point. I was on a global team not too long ago, and for me, it wasn't the cat photo. It was like, the photos of their kids, and I'd share photos of my kids, and all of a sudden, we're like, both parents, we never sleep. We must be friends. But there's this iceberg thing here, right? Which is, there are ways in which systems fight systems beneath the surface to ruin even the most well-intentioned enablement process focus. And this is what we think a lot about at Syncari, right? Where like, okay, someone puts in the data right, or it comes in via marketing automation right. Well, if you have iPass, right, like a Zapier or similar tool,
Oh my
and
gosh.
an ETL thing running, they've got different timings, right? All of a sudden, you're fighting these wars between systems around which records are going to govern, right? Like, you get it.
They're just paving over, right? Like the quality data with this other yeah.
It's copy paste overrides,
Absolutely.
right?
Yep.
It's such a
Right.
and brief Syncari picture. Like, this is what Nick and Miller set out to solve. They saw it at Marketo back in the middle of the last decade, and they patented stateful sync, meaning finally systems can be governed down market from enterprise crazy master data management, right? You can actually know when a record needs updated or is updated, or essentially observability and transformation and integration all in one place. Crazy idea. You don't need to throw up 8 different data layers. But Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, there is a strong culture around data technology that has a whole set of universities and courses and trainings built around a very small number of products that creates huge vendor lock-in and creates tons of messes and ultimately cost for the human stack. Like, you agree, disagree, modify?
Oh, I strongly agree. And I strongly agree. And I'm so glad that that's your problem to fix, because I have no idea. And like one of the ways to say that is that data is the outcome of the tech stack, right? So the purpose of the tech stack is to create better and more data, right? The purpose of the human stack is to be a better driver and to know what to do with that data. Yeah. So, and I like the division of labor here, because one of the biggest frustrations I have with technology is that we don't actually leave the human out. We just combine it with the tech, and we like rope them together and assume they're the same thing when they aren't. And so I look at the work that you're doing. I remember sitting down with the first person I met and looking at the way you guys are structuring your data, and I was blown away. I loved it. And I remember just saying, how are you deduping? Because, and then it wasn't just deduping. It was like layers of here's how. And I loved it. And I looked at that and was like, I'm so glad somebody else is out there solving this problem, because that's not the way my brain works. I don't want it to work that way. And we have to have that kind of data. So yes, in other words, yes, I agree with it. And there's a bunch of societal questions you're asking there that I'm completely leaving alone, because I have no idea. What I can say.
Let's dive into from an operations standpoint. You spend your time optimizing stacks, which means minimum viable, right? It means no more tools than necessary. Like, what do you see the common pitfalls are when people are adopting technology where they maybe didn't need a new piece of tech for it, like, and splitting the concepts of data from tech versus data for people into. There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, let's start that conversation with how those decisions get made. Right. Okay, because you're already laughing, right? The issues there
non-experts
it is non-experts making political tools. In the nonprofit space, is even worse. Like in the nonprofit space, what you have is, some board member like went to a conference, met somebody, got a donation for some, emerging CRM that is just
too trusting. Yeah.
Exactly right. So the RFP process is off. The people that are furthest away from the decision are the ones making it. They're making enormous, financial decisions based on limited information, and a lot of there's so much nuance in the data. And here's the catch: good at tech people are often bad at people. And so when you get a really good at tech person that understands why a decision should go one way, they're often the wrong person to explain it to the decision maker. And when that you're imagining it right now, that meeting, right, where it just like you took 2 months to get the right people in the room, and then it just like all went to. So I think that even in those questions, how do you get to minimum viable? You make better acquisition decisions, which is oftentimes retiring systems that you don't need. And getting at what those systems are is also a political question. Not to mention the fact that every team has a different tech stack. So digital culture lives not in an organization. It lives in small teams, and you have to work within the digital culture of that team. And so, yeah, I know I'm doing a major duck on the tech stack question that you're asking there, but I think that's part of my point is that we keep thinking that these are technical solutions, and even the acquisition of the right technology and retirement of the right technology, all of those are mitigated through human decisions, and probably the wrong human.
So maybe the way to ask it then is, what cautionary tales would you give the non-technical buyer or pseudo-technical buyer who has the budget about biases that exist in the market towards the approach du jour, the zeitgeist of the modern data stack, for instance, or anything like that, right? Where it may feel comfortable, and it's a high risk decision because it's 30, 40, 50K they're talking about. You don't get that money back in an easy sense, right? So how would you counsel them? I imagine you do a lot of this. And we can make this the last question, Tim, and wrap it on this, but how would you counsel them to dig and source the best information possible?
I would start by trying to remove fear, because decisions are almost entirely made on emotions. And so the way I would look at the fear related to that is I would equate it to a lot of C-suite decision makers on tech that say things like, I can't turn my computer on, so I don't know how to make this decision. And then they do, but they don't do it well, right? You never hear that person say, I didn't study accounting, so I can't be part of the budget process. And that caught me a long time ago, and I started asking, why is that? And I think the reason is because you can summarize the entire budget finance idea into more in than out. You got the right idea of more money in than money out. You can handle almost any conversation around budgeting. And they don't have that North Star of what are we even trying to do with this technology. And so their motivations without a North Star like that become, how do I get my staff to quit complaining? Which is not the question we want them to be asking, right? And it's a question that is not grounded in function and achievability and productivity, efficiency, like all the things we want. So the first thing to do is remove the fear by giving them a North Star. Look, the thing we're trying to do with technology and with our information systems is to make data-informed decisions. And then you explain why that is a chain, why that starts with data, how important clean data is, and how essential it is for us to, like, when this system is working at peak, it will outperform your instinct. Like, that's an inspiring, like, all of a sudden you've got them thinking, whoa, this could actually help me do my job, which they may not have thought. And so I think even in those conversations, what you want to do is rewire the human thinking around the objective so that they have the right framework in mind. And in every successful tech project we ever have seen, there's always no matter how big, no matter how small, there's a strategic leader and a tactical person, and the quality of their relationship is what determines the outcome of the technical project at the end. And so what you're trying to do is align the accountability between those two people. And that person, the tactical person, is probably the right one to make the decision. And what you're trying to do is get that leader to support their decision making and to run that up the flagpole so that they get all of the resource clearance, the time clearance, and the training clearance for post-project protocols, right? Is that helpful? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. You basically just described, like a RevOps or similar role being culturally influential via the relationship to their CRO, CEO,
Yes.
COO.
Yep.
You also described the action item for them is go build that relationship.
Yes.
Right. The action item for a CEO, CRO, COO is build that relationship downstream. Right. And ultimately, I loved how you put it, right? At its peak, the system will outperform your instinct. Tim, you really made me think about today, like how rare that is that executives believe that their systems are smarter than them, even though in theory the systems are the collected intelligence of their entire organization. And now we're just going to throw an AI in the mix and hope it fixes everything. Anyways, Tim, we're going to go ahead and wrap. This was super fun. I feel like we'll have to have you back in a few months and see how our understandings have collectively involved. But
absolutely.
Tim Lockie, humanstack.com, right? Is that the right URL?
Absolutely. Yep. Humanstack.com.
Humanstack. Yeah. Thank you for joining us. And there's some really good food for thought for both operations professionals and executives around how to get tech implemented, why it matters, how to reframe stuff for probably salespeople who don't trust it and are frustrated by it as a living, as a lifestyle. Yeah, it's really turning gears.
Thanks a lot.
We'll wrap up.
This is fun. Yeah, thanks for the questions and thanks for the work that you're doing. It is really important work. And I just want to double click on that. We've got to have better data in our system. So yeah, thanks for having me on. It's a fun conversation.
We agree. Thanks, Tim. Thank you for listening to the Distributed Truth Podcast. Check out our other episodes or visit Syncari.com to learn more about unified customer data. That's SYNCARI, Syncari.com. Thank you and have a great day.